Hello, and welcome back for some more words that were not invented by William Shakespeare. And so this is part two because I already did one video I hope you watched, where I talked about words that people claim that Shakespeare coined or invented, but it turns out he did not because the words were around even before he ever used them. Anyway, so and in that video, I only got through 5 words. They're the words in red on the screen here: assassination, bedazzle, bold-faced, deafening, and eyeball. Now, in Shakespeare's defense, he did indeed use all these words in his writings. It's just that people are giving him credit for inventing them when he didn't invent these words. And the problem with that is that Shakespeare did, in fact, coin and invent so many turns of phrase, so many words in English. So I really think we should get the record straight on which ones he did invent and not start giving him credit for ones that he didn't, because I think that cheapens the ones he did. So anyway, so the ones I didn't get to talk about yet in the first video are the words in colors other than red here. We've got frugal, hurry, inaudible, premeditated, puke, and uncomfortable. Very uh, weird assortment of words here, meaning a lot of very different things, but what they have in common is that uh, people have given Shakespeare credit for inventing or coining them. And so let's first talk about frugal. And the claim is that Shakespeare created the word frugal from the Latin frugalis. And it seems like a valid claim in all that, because they even have a citation, a little excerpt where he used it in The Merry Wives of Windsor. I was then frugal of my mirth. So it looks all good, right? Although he was using 2 L's to spell frugal and not one like we do today, but same word. So that's proof that Shakespeare did use this word. And this is, of course, uh, true that Shakespeare used the word, but he wasn't the first one. The truth is, Erasmus Desiderius, you might know him as a Dutch philosopher from the early 16th century, so just before Shakespeare's time. And in a translation of one of his works into English, a translator, Nicholas Udall, in 1542, used the word frugal, again with 2 L's, just like Shakespeare was using it. But 1542 means that was 22 years before Shakespeare was even born. So therefore, Shakespeare did not invent this word. Um, Although he used it, he didn't invent it. And it's interesting that I'm not going to point to Erasmus as the person who used the word, because it was indeed his translator, Nicholas Udall, who brought that word into English. And so I'm not even sure if Nicholas Udall was the first person to use it. Probably not, since he was a translator. He was probably using words that already existed. But what this does show us for sure is that 22 years before Shakespeare's birth means that Shakespeare could not have invented that word. And so another example is the word hurry, where the claim is simply that Shakespeare invented the word hurry. And this was in a trivia almanac. So they're presenting this as true fact, as absolute fact, as trivia. The Trivia Almanac 2015, which of course was published in 2015. But it's a shame that I didn't. I don't think they did all their fact checking before they came up with that trivia fact, because um, lots of people were using were using the word hurry before William Shakespeare did, including we have a list of words in Richard Mulcaster's Elementary in 1582. So bear in mind, 1582 is 7 years before William Shakespeare published the first of his best known works. So this is before his works were published. And hurry appears in that list of words, which is in alphabetical order between pearl bat and hurt. You have hurry in between. So therefore, Shakespeare didn't coin that phrase, although not having coined a phrase or not having invented it doesn't mean that his works didn't help popularize it even more, because that's likely it, and so many people saw his plays, so he exposed a lot of people to that word, but sadly didn't invent it. So what else? We have inaudible. And this claim is interesting to me. This is from a manual for secondary school literacy instruction, aka a manual that high school English teachers might use when they're teaching literature. And it's talking in that the authors were talking about good ideas for the curriculum, for an English curriculum. And they mentioned how Shakespeare had invented and coined so many words and phrases, and they were suggesting including a discussion of all the words and phrases that he invented right in class. And it's very good. They earlier in here, in a part that's not in the excerpt, they gave other good examples of phrases he has coined and all that. But then when they get to this one, when they're giving an example of words and phrases you should discuss, because Shakespeare invented them, they say he coined the words premeditated and inaudible. And it's too bad they gave those as an example, well, inaudible as an example, because Shakespeare didn't invent that word. And in the defense of these authors of secondary school literacy instruction, uh, they were citing somebody else's work. So this Savino, this author, was the person who made the original mistake. And how was it a mistake, or why? Because here we go in from George Puttenham's The Art of English Poesy, published in 1589, which, by the way, was the year that Shakespeare's started getting his works published, and he had not used inaudible in any of his works by then. So, but still, we see the word inaudible in the middle of this long excerpt from The Art of English Poesy in 1589. So that means very much that Shakespeare was not the first person to use this word in writing. Um, and so credit to George Puttenham for using that word first. And so let's go back to that quote again, about that claim again, about how Shakespeare coined the words premeditated and inaudible. I just showed you how he did not coin inaudible. So what about premeditated, right? What about that one? That one also turns out to be incorrect, because here is an example of the word premeditated being used in literature. In the very same year, 1564, that was the year that William Shakespeare was born. So, as we all know, newborns are not reading and writing yet, so they can't be coining phrases in the writing. So, Shakespeare, yeah, he was born in April of 1564, and already there was another author using this word, premeditated. So, sadly, Shakespeare did not coin that word, although just like inaudible and the rest of these words on this list, he did use the word premeditated in his writings, and he can be cited as one of the earlier known usages of those words, but he's not the very first, so we should not pretend like he invented them. And now, sorry, this next word might make you a wee bit uncomfortable. Puke. And did you know that Shakespeare is credited with inventing the verb puke? And this is from the Ottawa Citizen, uh, from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, of course. And what they were doing, this excerpt is from a correction that they were making when apparently an issue the of the Ottawa Citizen that had come out on Saturday, the Saturday before the printing of this one, um, they had claimed that he had invented the word puked, Puked. And so they're correcting this and saying, in fact, he invented the word puking, ing, right? And to me, I do respect them for trying to correct their errors and make sure they're giving only the facts. But puked versus puking, that's not a big deal to me because it's the same verb, just different conjugations of the verb and all that. So we could still be giving him credit for using the verb puke, um, even especially because they came up with a good example of puking in Shakespeare's writings, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Now, proof that he absolutely used that word, puking. But the thing is, other people had been using the verb puke before Shakespeare did. And here's an example of a use of the conjugation puketh um, from hawking, hunting, fowling, and fishing in 1596. So this was a use of the verb puke earlier than Shakespeare had ever used it. So he didn't really invent that either. Um, and speaking of uncomfortable, I'm sorry if that word did make you uncomfortable in hearing me say it so many times. Sorry about that. But again, speaking of uncomfortable, um, the claim here is that Shakespeare coined an astonishing number of words and phrases, which is true, right? I don't disagree with that. And they give lots of good examples like catch a cold, break the ice, foregone conclusion, good riddance, you know. And so those are little phrases. And then we have words like manager, for instance. That's interesting that he invented all of those, but one where I'm sure they're wrong about it is the word uncomfortable. And the reason why I'm so sure that they're wrong about the word uncomfortable is that here is an example of the word uncomfortable being used in an excerpt from um, George Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, from a letter that he wrote to Thomas Cromwell in 1534, which, by the way, 1534, that's 30 years before Shakespeare was born. So, therefore, once again, we have an example of yes, Shakespeare used that word, but he cannot have invented it because, heck, uh, he was not even born And who knows if his parents were even born yet, right? It was 30 years before his birth. Anyway, so yeah, so sorry about those last two words. Were a little uncomfortable, but that brings us to um, the fact that now I've debunked all 11 of these claims that Shakespeare invented these words, actually 10 claims, 11 words, but still. And that's why they're all in red on this graphic here, because we already know that for these words, Shakespeare did use them, and he was often one of the earliest people in the English language to use them. But in no case of the words listed here was Shakespeare actually the first person ever to use it. So he did not coin or invent any of these terms. And again, I'm not trying to take down William Shakespeare or hate on him or anything. I just think it's important that we have the record straight, um, because he's a person who did invent an incredible number of words and phrases in the English language. And by the way, I made a video about that. You might have seen it. If you haven't, please check it out. It's called Everyday Expressions from Shakespeare. And so thank you very much for everybody who watched this video, and please do give it a thumbs up. I appreciate it so much for people who watch the whole video, and here we are at the end. And so thank you very much for sticking around, and please do subscribe if you're not subscribed to the channel yet. It's free, it's easy, and it would help me out very much. So thank you so much. And yeah, and so I will start working on some different kind of videos about words, back to some weird word of the day. And so stay tuned for that. And so until then, see you around next time. Bye bye.